So joining me today, Chairman, CEO, and President of Standard Uranium, Jon Bey. It's great to have you back on the show, Jon. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. How are you, Jon?
I'm well. Very well as a uranium investor. The uranium market has taken a big run the last few days. Standard Uranium is one of the beneficiaries of that. Before we get into Standard, I'm curious just on your macro comments. What do you think of this move?
Yeah, it's well, I'd like to say I didn't see it coming, but we've been waiting for this for several years now, 3 years actually. So we thought it might happen a little earlier. Macro wise, I think this is, if this is the start, we are just getting started. And it was great to see, some nice movements Friday, Monday, and then again today. Today, markets are pretty flat. Some are up or down, some are up, some are down. We're up a little bit. So I'm happy to see that. We've got, news coming out today about our Sundog project, which was excellent to get, great response from the market with, I think, over almost 2 million shares traded already today, which is excellent to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've had quite a year. You've IPO'd earlier. You've done 2 very successful raises. You've got lots of cash in the bank. And we'll be talking with Neil McCallum and Sean Hillacre from your Geo side shortly. But so things have gone really well for you. Reflect for a second on, it's almost the end of the year now. Reflect on how the year has gone. Has it gone according to plan? Are you happy with where you are so far? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And thanks for asking that question. This gives me an opportunity to sort of share, a bit of a summary for 2020 for your listeners. And we started 2020 as a private company. We were, market cap of 5 million. We had 4 main objectives. The first one was to complete our public listing. And we did that on May the 4th. Following May 4th, we did our second objective, which was to do a capital raise. Led by Red Cloud and Eventus Capital, we raised 4.5 million. The terms were 20 cents with a 22-cent flow through and 30-cent warrant. That was oversubscribed, upsized twice, and we closed on 4.5 million. That allowed us to proceed to our third objective, which was to drill our Davidson River project for its inaugural drill program, and that went exceptionally well. We ended up drilling 13 holes over 5,100 meters. We did it on time, on budget, in challenging COVID conditions. Really helped, having great help with the Big Bear Camp from Chief Teddy Clark and the First Nations group, Clearwater Dene, as well as, Access Helicopter and the guys at our driller, which is aggressive drilling. They were all remarkable and allowed that drill program to go well. Now, following that drill program, our next objective was to make sure we got to the end of the year fully capitalized and fully permitted for our other programs. So we went back to the market in October. We announced another capital raise of 3 million. That was upsized, oversubscribed once more. Same terms as earlier, the 20 cent with the 30-cent warrant, 22-cent flow through. And we closed on 3.5 million. So we closed out 2020, meeting all our objectives. We're now a public company. We're all prepared for 2021, and we're looking forward to getting into the Davidson River camp again at the end of January and starting our follow-up drill program, which I believe you and Neil and Sean are going to dig into later in this interview. So it's been a great year. I hope that gives you a bit of an introduction to potential new investors that are watching our story today as we head out for a strong 2021.
Yeah, exactly, Jon. I think there could be potentially a lot of new investors watching this video. I mean, the run that we've seen in the uranium sector is going to catch some eyes. We've seen even the biggest companies like Cameco just get, gapping up on big volume and pushing, big percentage wise. So if you were to, if there's a newer investor watching today and, they're considering taking a position in the uranium sector and they're looking at Standard Uranium, what would you say are the key reasons why they should look at Standard and consider an investment?
So we believe we are a fantastic opportunity right now because we are pre-discovery. I mean, you look at previous companies that are sort of in our situation. What can happen when they make a discovery? It can be a 10 or 20 bagger. So we believe we've got a fantastic project, our Davidson River project, which we drilled once. We've got a lot of great insight into our next drill program. And should we make a discovery there, investors who are investing in a company in our bar size can do extremely well. Now, you don't just invest in any company because they're pre-discovery. I want to point out the fact that we've got an exceptional team that we have built specifically for this project. We've got 4 gentlemen who've joined our technical team. Galen McNamara, an advisor who's come to us from NextGen. Garrett Ainsworth, one of our directors and technical leader. He's also from NextGen. He was instrumental in both the Arrow project and Fission's Triple R project, where he was the geologist who actually made the discovery of those radioactive boulders. And then you add Neil McCallum, our VP of Exploration, who's been specifically looking at uranium and studying and working with companies in this space, in this region for the last 15 years. And then we've added Sean Hillacre, who just left NextGen after 5 years of doing his master's degree on the Arrow deposit. So he knows these rocks better than anyone in the region. So having those 4 guys help lead our team is instrumental. And on top of that, it's not just us talking about our story. If you look at our shareholder list, who are the institutional funds that have invested in us, we're proud to say we've got some of the top institutional funds in all of the world investing in Standard at this point. You look at Mike Alkin from Station Cove, Marcelo Lopez from L2 Capital, Guy Keller from Tribeca, and the list goes on and on and on for multiple companies that are Canadian flow-through funds or uranium funds specifically looking at companies like ours. So having those in our investing with us and believing with us says a lot to investors who don't know our company.
Yeah, I still am impressed to this day that you've been able to bring in the quality of funds that you have, John, especially at this stage in the process, and the team that you've assembled. Obviously, the guys that you brought on all have a lot of experience in the sector. They've they've helped discover and delineate other deposits already. For those, if you're newer to the sector, Arrow and Triple R, those are potentially the next uranium mines to come online in the Athabasca Basin. These are high grade discoveries, and the individuals that John just mentioned were all part of that process. So it's an impressive roster. I've said this to you before, John. I say you've assembled quite the all-star team. If you were a coach, you've assembled a really good team of players. And that's obviously important, because it's not just a one-person show. It's obviously the quality of your team that makes a big impact. The other thing I wanted to note as well, I've noticed anyway, and I'm sure others have as well, that you've been buying in the open market. And I think you started in October sometime, and you were a steady buyer throughout November, in the mid to low teens. Any comments that you can share on why you're on the bid? Why you've been buying
definitely.
shares?
So when we completed our last drill program, our share price was up around 36 cents. I think a lot of investors were hoping we'd make that initial discovery. That didn't happen. What we did gain a lot of great insight is to our next drill program. And when you come off the back of that and we go into a financing, there are a lot of flow-through funds that come into it. And then as we get towards the end of the year, there's people selling for tax losses for various reasons. I still believe we're extremely undervalued. I believe, a couple of days ago, we were at 12 cents. I think we're at 15 or 16 today. I've been buying all the time. Every week I've been purchasing, because I believe we should be at least where we were, 25 or 30 cents at this point prior to our next discovery. And I anticipate as we get into early 2021 and we get set for our drill program to begin, and we start really marketing and sharing that story, I believe there's going to be a huge opportunity for investors to see the share price increase again. And I want to be positioned myself.
Yeah, I think I've seen you've added around 100,000 shares, give or take. You're obviously putting your money where your mouth is. I think it's always good to see when CEOs are buying their own stock, showing confidence to the market that you obviously feel the shares are not being, fairly valued at this point. So you're taking advantage of it.
It's funny, when I talk to investors about a portfolio they want to build for themselves, whether it's uranium or other sectors, I always say, it's great to get to diversify your portfolio, have some developers, some explorers, early stage, later stage. And I had all that in my portfolio. But over the last few months, I've been selling all my peers, because I think the value is in our company. So I've been selling my peers and buying ourselves. So I'm sort of probably overly weighted in Standard right now, which I believe is going to be a home run for us down the road.
Well, I hope so too. Speaking of your peers, I do want to make one comment, John, and I'll get your comment on it.
Sure.
Before I looked into your company, I talked to a few of some of the other CEOs in the business, in the uranium business, and it does tend to be a smaller group. But uranium is not a big space. And they all mentioned that they were really impressed with the property package that you put together, the Davidson River, that they think there is something there. And this is coming from, CEO, executive CEOs that are potentially competing for capital. So, to hear, I actually believe some of them actually participated in one of your capital raises. So
you are correct. I think when we did our go public listing, I probably had a dozen of our peer CEOs in the offering. So it was a very small group. We typically, this time of year, December, second week of December, we're all typically meeting in Saskatoon at the Senator Hotel for our big uranium night, which is a fantastic opportunity for our peers to get together. We are a very small group, and we have, I think for the most part, we all get along very well. We respect each other, look at our projects, and we try to help each other out. We're quite often on the road together at different conferences when that actually happens. And, there aren't that many people in this space who, don't have a pretty good relationship. There's a few. I'm not going to name names, but I get along with almost everybody, so I'm pretty easy to get along with, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I just thought it was. I thought it was really interesting that how much potential they thought that the Davidson River property had, and a few of them said, we kind of wish we had gotten that property. We really wanted it, and obviously Standard Uranium came out on top. And there is a story to why the property wasn't drilled before. It was involved obviously in the legal process, and it used to be off limits to drilling. So you're really controlling a piece of property that, had certain factors not gone the way they did, obviously would have probably seen a much greater degree of drilling than it has already.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for any of your listeners that are interested, I think we've covered off all these things on previous interviews. So maybe they could go back and listen to it. But one thing I will highlight is, we talk about some of the team I've assembled. One of those fellows, I'll give you a bit more details, Garrett Ainsworth. At the time when we started Standard Uranium, he was the VP of Exploration for NextGen. NextGen was offered the Davidson River project by the vendor, Jody DeRouge, right after they made their Arrow discovery. And the CEO, Lee Currier, passed on it. He said, no, thanks. We've got Arrow. We're going to focus on that. But Garrett, being the VP of Exploration, he loved that project. And he thought, if he ever left NextGen, this is the project he'd want to go after, the Davidson River project. So the day he left NextGen, I called him up. He was in my office the next day, and he was on our team. So he loves it. He wants to make the next discovery again in this region. And he believes, the Davidson River project is the most exciting project in the basin. And a guy with Garrett's credentials could have gone to any uranium company. So to have him on our team says a lot about our project and some of the other team members I've assembled.
Yeah. So you've got the team members, you got the property, you got the money in the bank, you got the funds backing you, lots of things going your way, John. It's been a great year. So appreciate you coming on and doing, a quick little intro here before we get to the technical stuff with Neil and Sean. But,
great. So have a great interview with my team. I know they love to get technical and take you into the weeds. So really get in there, find out what's going on with this Davidson River project, and enjoy it while you do it. I know you really find this stuff fascinating. So good luck.
Yeah, always do, John. Yeah, thank you. And for anyone, stay tuned for the technical stuff. We'll get right to it. So until then, John,
thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I have with me Neil McCallum, Vice President of Exploration at Standard Uranium, and I also have Sean Hillacre, Standard Uranium's Project Manager and Geologist. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Doing really well, John.
Thanks for joining me. It's been about 2 months since we talked last, and a lot has happened. I know you've had a chance to sort of go through the results and do the analysis. That's very important. But you guys, in the meantime, have been staying healthy, staying busy. Sean, you're not buried too much in snow in Saskatoon?
No, not too much. It's been melting. So yeah, no, things are good.
There you go. So I think what I wanted to start off with, the company disclosed some of the assay, or not the assays, but your results from your phase 1 drilling. Like I said, about 2 months ago, and you've had this chance now to sit back and review the results. And, I believe that's every geologist I talk to tells me this time of sitting back and analyzing that data is very important. So Neil, maybe you can start us off on why that, being able to, loop all the data together and kind of look at it from a higher level standpoint is important, and what were sort of the main takeaways that you came away with after that analysis.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, the period of time right now, you can do some interpretive work based on what you see in the field, because when you're looking at the drill hole one by one, you don't get to compare one hole to the next. Whereas when you compile it all together, you get a really subjective look at all the information, and some things might stick out to you that you might not realize when you're just looking at it hole by hole. So that's really important. The other major thing is putting it into a 3D model, which is what a lot of people do even at the exploration game nowadays. You can infer a lot of trends. You can look at the structures observed in one hole and project that to another hole. And you can tie that back into all the other layers of exploration data that you may have. In this case, we have a lot of geophysics. We can tie those drill holes back into the geophysics and then sort of confirm a lot of our ideas, and then maybe even realize trends that we haven't even tested yet, which we've got. So we'll get into that later.
Okay. And for a newer investor, I think with the recent run in uranium we've been having, there might be some newer investors listening in. If they read the last two news releases, especially the second last one with your phase 1 drilling results and the phase 2 program, there's a lot of really technical language in there. It's pretty complex, maybe a little bit, intimidating to certain people. What could you give a newer investor sort of a higher level? What should they be the key takeaway from some of those initial, observations from your cores?
Yep, absolutely. I think the idea is that because we're testing their blind drill targets, we don't have outcrop where we can take measurements. We don't have outcrop where we can sample directly. A lot of our targeting is based on geophysics, and we have some geochemistry that we can help guide us. But for the most part, we really have to extract as much information as possible out of these drill holes. And using that geochemistry is a big tool. And again, using those 3D models is a big tool. A lot of the other projects that have been discovered in the area too, like Arrow, there's no outcrop exposure. The only way you're going to know it's there, even looking at some of the historical data on top of the Arrow deposit, you can't see that in the geochemistry. So what they did was found some really compelling geophysics targets and then drilled from there. So that's essentially what we're trying to do on our project in a different part of the Southwest Athabasca.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that the rocks and structures that you encountered, maybe I'll throw this at you, Sean, and I know you have some experience at Arrow. Are you seeing the same sort of rocks and structures at Davidson River in this phase 1 drilling that you saw at Arrow?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the news release language is a bit complicated, but what it really boils down to is, confirming these geophysical targets and finding the right rocks and the right structures that, give you good odds of finding uranium mineralization, and especially of size to be interesting. So just confirming those, different geophysical layers, structures with graphite in them, hydrothermal alteration, all these signs of being proximal to some uranium mineralization. So I think, a key takeaway from the news release is that we've been finding the right rocks, the right structures, pretty typical of that area of the basin. And now we have all of our geochemistry as well to back that up and kind of add another layer. So yeah, okay. Really interesting results. Yeah.
All right, and I think we'll get into the geochemistry in a second, but maybe let's start at the targets that you've identified. And I'm going to go to one of the slides, the graphics from your news release. I'll bring that up here. And I believe you've identified in red with these red circles. These are basically going to be your areas of focus in phase 2. So Neil, can you walk me through why the areas that you've circled in red, what is it about those areas that you feel merits the follow-up work?
Yep, I guess starting at the south end, that skyline target that we've outlined in red there, really that is based on the geologic observations, which is also backed up by some of the geochemistry of some of the most, I guess, juicy looking geology in terms of structures and being the right rock type. And then some of that geochemistry really backs that up in terms of pathfinder elements and the like. And then moving up from that, the meadow target, which is a little bit to the north of that, on that warrior trend. That's another area where structures coincide with some of these geochem. And then the levee target is an area to the east of where we drilled, and we can look at that later on a cross section that really highlights that we haven't yet tested the entire width of the corridor, which is an important piece that we'll get into later.
Okay, and yeah, let's go there now. So I'll bring that cross section up, and so this is the cross section of that area that you were just talking about, I believe, right, Neil?
Yep.
So what is it? We talked about it on a previous video, but for those that might not have seen it or might not understand, why is it so important to be able to define the width and know sort of the boundaries of the conductive corridor?
Yep, that's right. So these conductive corridors, as they've been defined, are defined first of all on the geophysics, confirmed in the drilling. So these corridors are packages of graphite and or sulfide-rich rocks surrounded by things that aren't graphite-rich. So they're a lot harder. They're probably, can consider them orthogneisses, meaning they're not maybe metasedimentary. You might have more of the sedimentary rocks in the middle in these corridors. And where you've got the boundary between those really harder, competent orthogneisses, and then the rocks in the corridor, which can be faulted, they can be a lot more structurally altered. Where you've got that edge of the corridor is right where you want to be, because you've got that area of contact where you've got rocks that can be faulted versus rocks that can't be faulted. So you've got that contrast between the two rock types. And that seems to be where you're finding these deposits in the Southwest Athabasca Basin, whether it's Triple R deposit on the Patterson Lake corridor, or the Arrow deposit is on the opposite side of the same corridor, just a little bit further to the northeast.
Okay, so you need to define, you want to be able to define that boundary, the corridor boundary, because the deposit is either going to be on one side or the other, and it's important to know where that boundary exists, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a certain amount you can do with the geophysics, but obviously the best way to test it is via drilling. So,
and the drilling did verify that you did intersect the corridor, I believe, on the western side, correct? And it's the eastern side that you're still kind of hunting for. Correct.
Yeah, you can see on that that map there, we've pretty well found the western side, sorry, of the corridor, kind of around this area. And then the eastern side is where we need to look, kind of over here. This is the last drill hole, number 5. We need to go a little bit further west. The geophysics suggests that there's more conductive rocks to the east, sorry, of that whole 5.
To the east.
Yeah.
Okay. And these, I'm just going to clear those for a second so it doesn't get crowded. But these gray zones here, these are the graphite bearing zones.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's what's giving you your conductive response in the geophysics, right? Okay. So you're looking for another one of those more to the east.
Yeah, and it's obviously not on the map because we haven't intercepted it in drill hole. But I expect that once we drill another hole to the east, we're going to see another one of these graphite sulfide-rich shear zones, which is truly against the edge of the corridor, which we've defined right now by drilling. Okay.
And again, you're wanting that sulfide or graphite and sulfide-rich shear zone to be up against really hard rock to get that competency contrast, and that's provides the best conditions for getting a uranium to deposit.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay. Sean, I'm curious, when you look at a slide like this, when you look at the cross-section that this is formed, how does this compare to what you saw at the Arrow deposit? Are there similarities here that would be encouraging to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, essentially it's a mirror image of Arrow, looking at a cross-section of the Patterson Lake corridor. You can see over here, there's pink area with the relatively unaltered rocks in the hanging wall of the system. So geologically speaking, when you're looking at a structural corridor like this, there's always a hanging wall and a footwall. And at the Arrow deposit, there's also these unaltered orthogneisses in the hanging wall of the system. So everything is dipping to the west-southwest on the Warrior trend and dipping to the southeast at Arrow. So we see these same rocks in the hanging wall, and then these stacked lenses of graphitic, sulfitic rocks butted up against all these different purple units that are more quartz rich.
Okay.
So it kind of speaks to our mirror theory in that regard, where we have these combinate rocks in the hanging wall, and then these stacked lenses of structural rocks right in the center of it.
And sorry, Sean, just for clarity, when you talk about the stacked lenses, you're talking about the gray and the green zones, correct? Am I getting that right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that they're all kind of parallel and dipping the same way. Yeah.
Okay. So did that surprise you that you got something so similar to Arrow, maybe just a mirror image? Like, does that excite you to see something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were just talking about the competency contrasts. This is a really good geological situation to get that when you have all these differing rock types all stacked up against each other. So when the crust moves around, then you get these soft rocks that are going to shear, and then the quartz-rich ones that won't. So it's a really good structural recipe for creating that accommodation space for potentially uranium-bearing fluids to come in. So yeah, it is a great thing to see, and really excited to follow up on it.
And I mean, we do have some core examples here, and this was in the news releases. I believe the top box, hole 9. These are towards the southern part of the Warrior trend, right? That you had drilled. Skyline, I believe, guys. Am I remembering that right? Okay, Skyline. So, like, you can see there's a big faulted zone in the middle, and I think that fault even shows up on this map, if I'm not mistaken, right? It runs right into hole 9.
Yep, absolutely. You can see those kind of brownish lines on the map there that are interpreted major structures. They're trending northeast, southwest. Yeah, and cross-cutting right through hole number 9 and 11. And yeah, it was really great to actually see those and confirm those with the drill holes.
Okay. And Neil, I'll switch back to you for a second. For some of these other targets, so the Warrior trend was your focus in phase 1 drilling. All of the holes went on to that one. Mm-hmm. But you also have identified here the Bronco and the Saint trends. Obviously, you haven't drilled those yet. They have never seen drilling before from anybody. How are you identifying? There's 4 zones here identified for follow-up. What criteria were you using to pick those areas to follow up in your phase 2 drilling program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we sort of went through the same filtering of targets that we did for the Warrior trend. We applied that same rule and using a little bit of that information that we gained from the Warrior trend, where we actually got to test some of those geophysics trends. We're using the best looking ones on those. So again, lots of cross-cutting structures, looking for some of those bright spot targets where you can see in the EM on the Saint trend, and then that Bronco trend. It's not quite as wide as the Warrior trend, but still in my mind, it's a really good target to follow up that really needs to see some drilling.
Okay, so just for those that are looking here and might not see exactly what you're talking about, if I were to draw an arrow here to this sort of mustardy area, just above the red, that's your EM bright spot, and then that sort of dash black line, that's a break in the conductor, correct? And those 2 conditions plus the cross-cutting structures, these brown lines that are cutting across it, those are all combining to form a sort of a high potential target, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's that Saint trend seems to, a lot of things really seem to line up right there on that target.
So Sean, and on that note, it was mentioned in the news release that the Saint target basically looks in your interpretation, the closest to what you saw at Arrow. Can you elaborate for everyone on that and what you're seeing here at Saint that reminds you so much about Arrow?
For sure. The part of the Saint trend that resembles Arrow, geophysically speaking, is that large break and offset in our VTEM conductor. So the main similarity here is how it appears that the conductor has been broken and essentially dragged in separate directions on either side of that interpreted cross-cutting structure coming through there. In addition, the offset of that VTEM conductor is about 500 or 600 meters based on the data. So the structural implications of this are what really makes it a great target to go test next year. It looks very similar geophysically to Arrow as far as magnetics, the conductor breaks, and interpreted cross-cutting structures.
Okay. And Neil, from a budget standpoint, when you're allocating meters to drill, because obviously you have a limited budget, there's only so many meters that you can allocate, and you're kind of having to pick between these targets. If you were to compare with, the planned meters that you intend to do on the Warrior Trend at Levy, Meadow, and Skyline versus the meters that you would do on the Bronco and Saint Trends, how would that roughly look? And I know that's going to change as you drill, but your plan going in, how do you figure those meters would be allocated?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably still 60 to 70% of our drilling is going to be on the Warrior Trend. We really like those targets still, like the entire trend. So the majority of the budget's going to go there, but really those other trends on the project are strong and need to be tested with kind of the same first pass drilling. This is just too good to pass up, definitely.
Okay. And Sean, I believe that, when we were talking offline, you mentioned the Saint Trend is kind of close to where you would be building a winter road, right? So from a logistics standpoint, it's like a really sweet target that way. It's close to where you would be kind of entering the property with a road.
Yeah, absolutely. So Q1 of next year, we're looking at putting in an access road to increase the efficiency of our logistics budget. And it actually just happens to run pretty much right by that target on the Saint Trend. So it's kind of a bonus, and it's going to make logistics a breeze for that.
Okay. We touched on it earlier, and I wanted to get back to it. It's the geochemistry. So this was part of the information that you obviously, when you first took the core out of the ground, you were in the field and you were looking, you would not have obviously known about the geochemistry, because that has to, that you have to do your samples, they have to be sent to the lab, that takes time. So you guys are now equipped with the knowledge of the geochemistry, and I believe it is shown on this slide here, the geochemical target. So do one of you want to walk us through the important information you got from on the geochemistry side of things?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So the geochemical indicators that we use in uranium exploration are specifically tailored to point us towards uranium mineralization. Okay. So there are different suites of elements that have been studied in detail in the academic community, and there's largely a consensus on which ones are actually useful for uranium exploration in the basin, and especially, in sandstones versus basement rocks and so forth. To name a couple, boron is typically an important one. It's a key component of a mineral called dravite, which has been shown to be spatially related to uranium mineralization in the basin. Other pathfinder elements are also used, in general, have been shown to be components of the geochemical signature or alteration halo of most unconformity-related deposits in the basin, or simply behave similarly to uranium itself, chemically speaking, like molybdenum or vanadium. And then on the cross section there in the yellow circles are some anomalous lead isotope values.
Okay.
So lead isotope ratios are useful in a different way. Radioactive decay of elements like uranium and thorium produce different lead isotopes depending on that element. So with this method, we use ratios to focus on the isotopes which would result from uranium decay, and use those as a vector to point us towards areas which may be proximal to uranium mineralization. So really useful as a kind of an extra layer of vectoring tools in our toolkit to help us point to the most interesting areas.
And from an overall standpoint, the geochemical results that you got, were they more just sort of reinforcing what you already knew from the drill results, or did they give you any clues to other areas to test that you might not have otherwise known without the geochemistry?
Yeah, mostly just confirming. Obviously, the structures are massively important. So it was great to see elevated pathfinders and anomalous lead ratios associated with those structures, as well as, anomalous uranium values as well in a few of the holes. One that I'll let Neil speak to a little bit more is the one you can see actually on the cross section. So the metal lake formation anomaly that's in the red dashed circle there.
Yeah.
So that value was more than twice background, and pretty significant for the metal lake formation itself, which could mean a couple different things. Neil can explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So the metal lake formation was fairly consistently low in uranium content. So having that sample there, actually at the top of it, comes into play, making it very interesting. We didn't really realize this area until we got the analytical back. So this one really stood out to us and kind of surprised us. So the thought there is that uranium wouldn't naturally be in the metal lake formation, so it would have had to come from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's the metal lake formation actually scouring the top of a basement hosted deposit, and that's what we're finding, that anomalous uranium, or whether it has just been sitting nearby a uranium deposit, and sort of that recent fluid flow has taken some of that uranium and it's dropped out for whatever reason in the metal lake. So it's one of those sort of arm waving, we might be in the right area. We don't know how far from the geochem, but it's interesting. You find atop the Triple R deposit that quite a bit of that metal lake formation had elevated uranium, especially near the bottom where it's sort of this almost sandstone. It's kind of brought up a lot of chunks of the deposit, it seems, and really made some interesting geology in that metal lake formation near the deposit.
Okay, so you have a correlation at Triple R then with the elevated uranium and the metal lake formation corresponding to the nearby actual mineralization in the basement at Triple R.
That's right.
Okay. So seeing this obviously has to give you a good feeling then that you might be, not necessarily not on top of it, but you're getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. There was one other slide that I wanted to bring up, and it's one I know, Sean, you had put together for people to basically give them a bit of a perspective when we're talking about how wide these corridors are, just how big the size is and how the Warrior Trend, the one that you've drilled so far, compares to Arrow and Triple R, the known uranium deposits. So can you kind of walk us through the key takeaways for people when they're seeing something like this?
Absolutely. So the top section there is a cross section through the Warrior Trend. You can see, based on our geophysics and our drilling, that at that section it's about 1 kilometer wide, which is quite substantial. It's actually the same section we looked at before, just with all the detail removed. You can still see the structures there. And then to the right of the extent of the corridor, there is that red dashed ellipse in there. Mm-hmm. So that represents an untested Maxwell plate. A Maxwell plate is a geophysical model of the conductors. So we use those for targeting in 3D, as well as the 2D ZTEM and VTEM anomalies. So we actually have a plate over there which could be representing the eastern side of that corridor. And you can see with our drill holes there, hole 1, 3, and 5, we're still quite a ways away from that potential edge. And then just for context and scale, I made some schematic sections through the Arrow deposit and Triple R, both on the Patterson Lake corridor. So at the locality of Arrow through there, it's about 950 meters wide, just looking at the geophysics. And so you can see the outline of the Arrow deposit in there, as well as just some simple representations of the structures in there that it's hosted with. And then same thing for the Triple R deposit at the bottom. So like we were talking about before with the edges of these corridors, rheology contrasts, it's really important to test the edges. So Arrow sits on the western side of the Patterson Lake corridor as defined by the geophysics, and then Triple R sits on the eastern side. So that's interesting in itself. And so just kind of speaks to the scale of these, deep-seated structural corridors that we're targeting, as well as the vast importance looking at our neighboring deposits of testing and finding these edges and really testing these structures that go quite deep. They're over 1 kilometer deep at Arrow, and I'm not sure how deep they go at Triple R, but there's a lot of exploration still to be done to truly test the corridor. So the scale of these things is large.
Yeah, not just large across the corridor, but also obviously along strike. Because Davidson River, the Warrior Trend alone is just massive, right? I'm trying to remember, was it like 10 kilometers long, or
I think it's up to 12 kilometers long on our property. Yeah.
So you have a lot of space. So that, just for clarity, Sean, that Maxwell plate is just then the geophysical interpretation of probably where the eastern side of the corridor, the conductive corridor is, right? Is that a good quick analogy?
Absolutely, it's a great analogy. And they're built by the geophysicists based on the data that they collect. So there's obviously a bit of room for interpretation and things, but it should be relatively close. That method was proven to work quite well at Arrow. So we're really excited to go back to Meadow and the Levy targets and test that eastern edge.
Okay. I wanted to bring up Standard Uranium just put out a news release yesterday, actually, on your Sundog target, which used to be the Gunnar project. Before we do that, just Neil, maybe some quick, any other information to share with people about when it comes to phase 2 drilling at Davidson River. When can shareholders expect that to sort of get going? And is there a lot of logistical work that has to happen before you get in and are able to drill, or what does that process look like?
Yep, at the beginning of January, the idea is to start the road building. And then roughly mid to late January, we can mobilize the drill and our teams up to site. But of course, we've got to be cognizant of the local COVID-19 situation. We were really happy with the way things were run this summer, just after they had quite a few outbreaks in the Losh. So I'm going to keep our eyes open and make sure we're being safe again.
Okay. So really, shareholders, if things go well, we're only 7 weeks away-ish from you getting the drill bit back in the ground. Yeah, that's exciting. Okay, well, let's quickly jump over to your latest news, and this came up. I just brought it up. It's been renamed the Sundog project. This is you can see from the map, it's quite a ways away from Davidson River, so sort of the northwest corner of the basin, I guess, versus the southwest corner. Now, I believe it was about mid or end of September that Standard Uranium had reported that you had these off-scale radioactivity in some samples, and now it looks like you have those assays back. So Neil, can you speak to that a little bit, and what has you excited about the results that you've received?
Absolutely. Yep. So we went to our 3 main target areas on this project, which we've named the Java, Haven, and Sky targets, as you can see on the map there in red text. And there's the real targets that I see kind of aren't really, we can't really see an outcrop, but we know from historical work that there is some uranium mineralization at surface. And the idea that we wanted to do is to sample these prospects, look at the geochemistry, and obviously take a look at the rock samples and say, can these be related to some of the geophysics targets that are nearby? Because it seems like at least at that Sky target, there was a fair amount of drilling at what's called the Stewart Island deposit. You can see that in red there. Those drill holes had greater than 0.1% uranium in quite a few holes. But that was all found in the sandstone. They didn't ever find any basement hosted mineralization. And that to me is where we ought to be looking. At the time of that drilling, they didn't understand unconformity related deposits. They just found uranium and then kept drilling around it, but didn't really seek to understand, or they didn't have the understanding at the time, that what we need to look for is geophysics targets that are kind of more in the basement. So my theory is that what we sampled on surface was, for the most part, in Athabasca sandstone. We need to be looking, obviously, at the unconformity related targets. And some of those have been tested with a little bit of drilling, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
So the theory is you're finding some of this mineralization, near surface, and the theory is it's basically sort of perched mineralization that's somehow migrated near surface, and it's just more indicative of a deeper deposit, like below the sandstone into the basement rock, that you can find, a relatively short distance away, sort of thing. Is that correct,
Yeah,
Neil?
the idea is that, there's going to be footprints around a large uranium deposit, and there's going to be, little high-grade zones that are nearby. You see that in a lot of other deposits in the Athabasca Basin. For a lot of these classic uranium deposits, like Cigar Lake is a good example that has perched mineralization a fair distance away from the main ore body.
Okay. So they act as clues, basically tell you you're in, again, sort of you're in the right area, maybe not right underneath, but look nearby.
I mean, because like classic Athabasca Basin unconformity related deposits aren't generally hosted up in the sandstone. Like that doesn't happen. So we need to look at that classic exploration model right at or in the basement at the unconformity.
Okay. Well, appreciate the comments on that. So obviously you have phase 2 at Davidson River to look forward to. You have some follow up at Sundog. When would you think the company would get to the Sundog deposit? Would that happen later in the winter or the spring?
Yeah, later in the winter. We want to make sure that the lake is all nice and frozen. Probably in March at that point. It seems to be like a good time of year for up there.
Okay. All right. So, well, I appreciate, guys. Thanks again for your time. Maybe I'll leave it off on Neil. I'll start with you. What are you most excited about going into the phase 2 drilling program? What has you most excited?
Yeah, I'd say definitely that levee target, finding that eastern contact of the corridor that we have not yet tested. I think that's really exciting for a lot of different reasons.
Okay. And Sean, what are you most looking forward to into phase 2?
Well, to be honest, I'm probably most looking forward to getting out of my house and back into the field, and then ground truthing our models and theories that we've been developing since the last program. And like Neil said, excited to expand on the Warrior holes that we drilled, and also venture out to the untested Bronco and Saint trends. Those are really good looking targets out there. So exploring with the drill bits, always the most exciting in the basin. So,
well, that's good. Well, I'm looking forward to what you guys dig up this time, and you've got a full war chest. You're fully funded to do it. There's a little bit of excitement coming back into the uranium space. So hey, it's a good time to be a uranium shareholder and a Standard Uranium shareholder. So good luck, guys. Make sure you stay warm when you get out in the field, and we'll be looking forward to results. So until then, guys, be safe. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Cheers.
John.